The envelope hit the mahogany desk with a sharp slap, and Ethan Royce's hand trembled as he held it. His face had gone from its usual arrogant tan to the color of old newspapers. Across from him, the woman he'd dismissed as just another maid stood perfectly still, her dark eyes calm, her voice still echoing in the vast study. "Should I continue reading, Mr. Royce?" Regina asked quietly, the foreign words rolling off her tongue like water over smooth stones. 10 seconds ago, he thought she was nobody. Now, his entire world was collapsing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to where this all began, 3 weeks before that moment that would change everything. Ethan Royce was the kind of man who believed his net worth was directly proportional to his worth as a human being. At 42, he'd built a tech investment empire that stretched across 3 continents, and he never let anyone forget it. His mansion in the hills overlooked the city like a crown overlooking subjects. All glass and steel and cold modern lines that screamed money but whispered nothing about warmth. "Are you incompetent or just stupid?" Ethan's voice cut through the morning air as he stood in his kitchen, glaring at his chef. "I said poached eggs with runny yolks. These are practically solid. Do you even understand English?" The chef, a middle-aged man named Marcus who'd trained in Paris, swallowed his pride. "Yes, Mr. Royce. I'll remake them immediately. Don't bother. I've lost my appetite." Ethan threw his napkin on the counter and stormed out, leaving Marcus staring at perfectly cooked eggs that any restaurant would have been proud to serve. This was Ethan's daily symphony. Belittling, dismissing, treating the 15 people who kept his life running like they were sophisticated appliances rather than human beings. His housekeeper heard him mock her accent. His gardener endured lectures about the intellectual gap between the educated and the laborers. His personal assistant had developed an ulcer from the constant verbal abuse disguised as high standards. And then there was Regina. She'd started working at the Royce mansion 6 months ago, brought in through an agency that specialized in domestic staffing. Early 30s, with dark hair always pulled back in a neat bun, she moved through the house like a shadow, quiet, efficient, almost invisible, which was exactly how Ethan liked his staff. "You cleaning lady," he'd said on her first day, not bothering to remember her name. "Those books go by height on the shelf, not by some random system. Use your eyes." Regina had simply nodded, that slight bow of her head that Ethan interpreted as deference but which was actually something else entirely. Something he was too arrogant to recognize. What Ethan didn't notice, because he never really looked, was that Regina had quietly reorganized his books by subject matter and chronology within each genre, creating a system that actually made sense. He didn't notice that when his antique clock stopped working, she'd fixed it, understanding the delicate mechanism that had baffled 3 professional repair people. He didn't notice that she hummed Rachmaninoff while she worked, or that her eyes lingered on his wall of first-edition philosophy books with a hunger that went beyond mere appreciation. The other staff noticed, though. "She's too smart for this?" Marcus whispered to the housekeeper one afternoon while Regina was outside. "Did you see how she organized the library? That's not cleaning, that's curating." "I heard her on the phone once," the housekeeper replied, her voice low. She was speaking 3 different languages in one conversation. 3. I don't even know what they were. "Maybe she's running from something," Marcus suggested. "Or maybe she just needs the work and doesn't care about using her brain. Or maybe," the gardener added, joining their hushed conversation, "she's waiting for something. People don't hide that kind of intelligence unless they have a reason." They had no idea how right they were, or how soon that reason would reveal itself. 3 weeks into October, everything changed. Ethan was in his study, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked his manicured grounds, when his assistant brought in the mail. Most of it was the usual nonsense, things his staff could handle, but one envelope made him pause. Heavy paper, cream-colored, a wax seal with an unfamiliar crest. The return address was from Zoravia, a small Eastern European country where one of his investment partners operated. "Finally," Ethan muttered, breaking the seal. Dmitri must have closed the factory deal. He unfolded the letter, and his confidence evaporated like morning mist. The text was dense, formal, written in what looked like a Slavic language but with characters and diacritical marks he'd never seen before. Not Russian. Not Polish. Not anything his expensive education had exposed him to. What the hell is this? He squinted at the page as if staring harder would somehow translate it. His chest tightened. This was supposed to be important correspondence. The factory deal was worth $40 million. And he couldn't read a single word. His first instinct was to fake it the way he'd faked understanding modern art and appreciating opera. But this was different. This required actual comprehension, and there was no one around to bluff to accept himself. Probably just formalities, he said aloud to the empty room, but his voice lacked conviction. He took a photo of the letter with his phone and opened 3 different translation apps. The results were gibberish, contradictory fragments that made no sense. Damn it! He slammed his phone down on the desk. His face was flushing now, that dangerous red that his staff had learned meant someone was about to get eviscerated with words. For the next 2 days, Ethan tried everything. He called business associates who'd worked in Eastern Europe. None of them recognized the specific dialect. He reached out to his old college roommate who'd become a linguistics professor. The man was away at a conference in Tokyo. He even considered hiring a professional translator. But his ego wouldn't allow it. Ethan Royce was supposed to be the smartest person in any room. Admitting he needed help with something as basic as reading a letter felt like admitting weakness. The letter sat in his study like an accusation, a reminder that all his money and all his supposed intelligence couldn't solve this one simple problem. It gnawed at him. He'd wake up at 3 in the morning thinking about it. His meals tasted like cardboard. His concentration during video conferences was shot. "Are you even listening, Ethan?" One of his board members snapped during a virtual meeting. "You've been staring into space for 5 minutes." "I'm fine," Ethan lied, his jaw clenched. "Continue." But he wasn't fine. The letter had become an obsession. A tiny crack in the perfect facade of his life that was threatening to become a chasm. Meanwhile, life in the mansion continued. Regina came in 3 times a week, cleaning and organizing, moving through the rooms with that same quiet efficiency. She'd been assigned to dust Ethan's study on Wednesdays, and she'd seen the letter lying on his desk, though she never commented on it or showed any interest. To Ethan, she was just part of the furniture, as insignificant as the expensive sculptures his decorator had insisted he buy. On the Wednesday of the second week, Ethan was in an especially foul mood. The letter had been joined by increasingly urgent emails from his Zoravian partner. Something about time-sensitive matters and legal implications and require immediate response. Each email ramped up his anxiety another notch. "You missed a spot," he snapped at Regina as she cleaned the windows in his study. "Right there. Are you blind?" Regina stopped, looked at the allegedly dirty spot that was actually perfectly clean, and simply nodded. "I'll clean it again, Mr. Royce." "Of course you will. That's what I pay you for, isn't it? To actually do your job." Ethan's voice dripped with contempt. He was taking out his frustration about the letter on the nearest target, which happened to be a woman who'd done nothing wrong. She sprayed the window again and wiped it in small, precise circles. Her face showed nothing, no anger, no hurt, no reaction at all. It was a skill she'd perfected over years of surviving in places where showing emotion could be dangerous. "Tell me something," Ethan said, turning away from his computer to look at her directly for perhaps the first time since she'd started working there. "Do you ever think about your life? About how you ended up cleaning other people's houses?" Regina paused, her cloth hovering over the glass. "I think about many things, Mr. Royce. I doubt that. People like you don't think, not really. You react, you survive, you follow instructions. Thinking is for people like me. People who build things, who create wealth, who move the world forward." He leaned back in his leather chair, warming to his cruel theme. "It's not your fault, really. It's just biology. Intelligence follows resources. Always has." "I see," Regina said softly, returning to her cleaning. Her voice was steady, betraying nothing of what was happening behind those dark eyes. Ethan didn't notice the slight tightening of her jaw, or the way her knuckles went white around the cleaning cloth for just a moment. He'd already dismissed her again, turning back to his screen where another email from Zoravia was demanding his attention. The staff room that afternoon was tense. Marcus had overheard Ethan's latest tirade, and his face was flushed with anger as he recounted it to the others. Biology? Intelligence follows resources. Marcus's voice shook. I trained under 3 Michelin star chefs. I speak 4 languages. But to him, I'm just some idiot who can't cook eggs right. He told me yesterday that my mother must have dropped me on my head, the gardener added quietly, because I suggested moving the roses to get more sunlight. I have a degree in horticulture. They all looked at Regina, who was methodically folding cleaning cloths in the corner. She hadn't said anything since coming downstairs. Regina? The housekeeper asked gently. Are you okay? We all heard what he said to you. I'm fine, Regina replied, but her hands had stopped moving. She stared at the cloth in her lap, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Pain, yes, but also something harder. Something like resolve. He doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know anything. One day, Marcus said darkly, someone's going to humble that man. Someone's going to show him exactly how wrong he is. Regina looked up at him, and the smallest smile touched her lips. Perhaps, she said, perhaps sooner than you think. The following week, Ethan's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. More emails. More urgency. The Zoravian partner had sent a final message that even Google Translate could handle. If no response by Friday, we proceed with authorities. Your choice. Authorities? What authorities? What was in that damn letter? Ethan paced his study like a caged animal, the letter clutched in his hand. He'd memorized every curve of the incomprehensible text by now, as if staring at it enough would somehow unlock its meaning through sheer force of will. It was Thursday. He had less than 24 hours. His pride was finally cracking. He'd have to hire a translator, admit defeat, let someone see that Ethan Royce, genius investor, couldn't handle a simple letter. The thought made him physically ill. He was so lost in his spiraling thoughts that he barely noticed when Regina entered the study for her usual Wednesday cleaning, a day late because of a scheduling conflict. She moved quietly to the bookshelves, beginning her methodical dusting. Ethan watched her, and something mean and desperate bubbled up inside him. Here was someone even lower than his current emotional state, someone he could still feel superior to, someone he could use to make himself feel better about his own inadequacy. You know what's funny? He said suddenly, his voice too loud in the quiet room. Regina turned, cloth in hand. Sir, I'm looking at you, and I'm trying to imagine what it's like to be you, to have such a simple life. No complicated problems. No multimillion-dollar deals. Just clean this, dust that, go home. Must be nice in a way. No stress. No real thoughts to worry about. I manage, Regina said carefully. I bet you do. Ethan walked over to his desk and picked up the letter, waving it casually. See, people like me, we deal with complex international business. Multiple languages, different cultures, intricate legal frameworks. It's exhausting being this educated, this aware of how the world really works. He was building to something, his voice taking on that performative quality he used when he wanted an audience, even an audience of one. The cruelty was the point now, the way a wounded animal might lash out at anything nearby. This letter, for instance, it's from a business partner in Zoravia. Very important, very confidential. Written in Zoravian, which is a complex Slavic dialect with Baltic and Hungarian influences. Extremely difficult to translate. I've been working on it, of course, but it requires a sophisticated understanding of both linguistics and business terminology. Regina had gone very still. Something in her posture had changed, though Ethan was too caught up in his performance to notice. I doubt you've even heard of Zoravia, he continued, that nasty smile playing on his lips. It's a small country, very obscure. They speak Zoravian there, which is related to languages like Kashubian and Ruzin, with some Finno-Ugric elements. Fascinating from a linguistic standpoint, really, but I wouldn't expect you to understand any of that. I know Zoravia, Regina said quietly. Ethan blinked. What? I said I know Zoravia, Mr. Royce. It's northeast of Romania, between Moldova and Ukraine. Population about 2 million. The language is indeed complex. A transitional dialect that linguists classify as East Slavic with significant Hungarian and Romanian borrowings. The grammar structure is particularly difficult because it maintains 7 cases and 3 genders, with irregular verb conjugations that even native speakers sometimes struggle with. The room went silent. Ethan stared at her as if she'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. What are you talking about? You said Zoravian was complex, Mr. Royce. You're correct. It's one of the more challenging languages in that region. Regina's voice remained level, but there was something new in it now, a quiet confidence. Was there something else you wanted to say about it? Ethan's face was cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been the first stirring of unease. How do you know about Zoravian languages? I know many things, Mr. Royce. Regina set down her cleaning cloth, giving him her full attention for the first time since she'd started working there. You've never asked. This wasn't how this conversation was supposed to go. Ethan was supposed to be the expert, the educated one, the person explaining things to the ignorant maid. He scrambled to regain the high ground. Well, knowing about a language and actually speaking it are 2 very different things, he said, his voice sharp with defensive arrogance. Anyone can read a Wikipedia article. Actually translating business correspondence requires years of study and native-level fluency. That's true, Regina agreed. This letter, for example. Ethan was improvising now, his cruel streak fully activated. He held up the envelope, waving it like a prop in his show. This requires someone with genuine expertise. Not something you picked up from a textbook or a language app. The other staff had started to gather near the study door, drawn by the sound of raised voices. Marcus, the housekeeper, the gardener, even Ethan's assistant, they were all watching now, though Ethan was too focused on Regina to notice his growing audience. In fact, Ethan said, his voice dripping with mockery, I'll make you a deal. Since you seem to think you're so educated, why don't you prove it? Translate this letter for me. Correctly, mind you. Every word accurate, every nuance captured. If you can do that, if you can actually read and translate this business correspondence that has been baffling professional translators, then you can have my salary. He laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. That's right. My salary. $7 million a year. All yours. What do you say, cleaning lady? Want to try your hand at being a genius? The staff in the doorway were frozen, horrified. They'd seen Ethan be cruel before, but this was different. This was him dangling someone's dignity like a toy in front of a dog. Entertainment born from his own inadequacy and frustration. Marcus started to step forward, to say something, to stop this, but the housekeeper grabbed his arm. Wait, she whispered. Just wait. Regina looked at Ethan for a long moment. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes were different now. They held something ancient and certain, like a judge who'd heard all the evidence and was ready to deliver a verdict. Give me the letter, Mr. Royce, she said quietly. Ethan laughed again, high on his own cruelty. Oh, you're actually going to try? This I have to see. Here. He thrust the letter at her with theatrical flourish. Please, enlighten us all with your vast education. Regina took the letter gently, carefully, as if it were something precious rather than a weapon being used against her. She unfolded it, and her eyes moved across the text. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then she looked up at Ethan and said, in perfect, flawless Zoravian, Should I read this aloud, Mr. Royce, or would you prefer a written translation? The color drained from Ethan's face so fast it was like watching a magic trick. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I'll read it aloud, Regina decided, and her voice changed, taking on the formal cadence of official correspondence. The words flowed from her like music, each syllable perfectly pronounced, each complex grammatical construction handled with the ease of a native speaker. To Mr. Ethan Royce, from Dmitry Volkov, Chief Operating Officer, Zoravia Industrial Holdings. Subject: Urgent legal notice regarding factory investment and regulatory violation. She paused, letting that sink in, then continued. Dear Mr. Royce, I am writing to inform you of a critical situation that has developed regarding our joint venture in the Zoravia textile manufacturing facility. Ethan's legs seemed to go weak. He groped behind him for his chair and sat down heavily, his face now the color of old snow. Regina's voice remained steady, professional, as she continued translating. During a routine audit conducted by the Zoravian Ministry of Finance, irregularities were discovered in the fund transfers associated with our project. Specifically, 3 payments totaling €8 million were processed through accounts that appear to be connected to entities currently under investigation for money laundering and sanctions violations. Stop, Ethan whispered, but Regina didn't stop. I want to be clear that these irregularities were initiated from your company's side without my knowledge or approval. However, because both our names appear on the partnership documents, the authorities are treating this as a joint investigation. I have been cooperating fully with investigators and have provided all documentation showing that these transfers were authorized by your financial controller, whom I never met and whose credentials I accepted based on your assurances. The staff in the doorway were completely silent now, watching this impossible scene unfold. Marcus's mouth was hanging open. The housekeeper had her hand over her heart. Ethan's assistant looked like she might faint. Regina continued, her voice never wavering, each word landing like a hammer blow. The investigators have given me until Friday, October 27th to provide evidence that you were aware of these irregularities and either approved them or failed in your fiduciary duty to monitor your own company's financial transactions. If I cannot provide such evidence, and if you do not respond to this letter with a full explanation and cooperation plan, the investigators will assume that you deliberately structured these payments to evade detection. Please stop, Ethan said again, louder this time, but his voice cracked. The potential charges include conspiracy to commit money laundering, sanctions evasion, and fraud. Under Zoravian law, these charges carry penalties of up to 15 years imprisonment and complete forfeiture of all assets connected to the criminal enterprise. Additionally, because these payments crossed international borders, Interpol has been notified and may issue a red notice for your arrest pending investigation. Regina looked up from the letter, her eyes meeting Ethan's. He looked like he might be sick. Sweat had broken out on his forehead, and his hands were shaking. Should I continue, Mr. Royce? There are 2 more paragraphs detailing the specific account numbers and dates of the transfers, as well as information about the Zoravian legal representation you will need to hire immediately. You, Ethan managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. You speak Zoravian. Yes, Mr. Royce. I speak Zoravian. Regina folded the letter carefully. I also speak Russian, Hungarian, Romanian, English, French, and German. Zoravian is actually one of the easier ones, despite what you told me about its complexity. But how? Who are you? The arrogance had completely evaporated from Ethan's voice. He sounded like a lost child. I'm exactly who you thought I was, Regina said calmly. I'm your maid. I clean your house 3 times a week. I dust your books. I organize your papers. I make sure your world runs smoothly while you barely notice I exist. She took a step closer to his desk, and Ethan actually flinched. But I'm also other things. Things you never asked about because you assumed that someone who cleans houses couldn't possibly be educated, couldn't possibly have a past, couldn't possibly be more than what you saw on the surface. Marcus found his voice. Regina, what were you before? She turned to look at the gathered staff, and a sad smile crossed her face. I was a court translator in Zoravia. For 8 years, I worked in the Ministry of Justice, translating legal documents, international treaties, criminal proceedings. I handled everything from trade agreements to war crimes tribunals. Then why? The housekeeper asked, her voice thick with emotion. Why are you here, cleaning houses? Because 3 years ago, I translated documents in a corruption case involving very powerful people. People connected to the government, to organized crime, to networks that stretched across Europe. Regina's voice remained steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. I did my job. I translated truthfully. And when those people were convicted, their associates decided I knew too much. They decided I was a threat. The room was completely still. Even Ethan had stopped trembling, caught up in her story. I had 12 hours warning from a friend in the prosecutor's office. 12 hours to pack a bag and disappear. I left my apartment, my career, my entire life. I made it to Romania, then Hungary, then Austria, working odd jobs, staying ahead of people who wanted to make sure I never testified in any other cases. Eventually, I made it here to this country with forged papers and a new name. Regina isn't your real name? The assistant asked. No, my real name is still dangerous to speak. She looked down at the letter in her hands. I came here with a master's degree in linguistics, 8 years of professional translation experience, and credentials that meant nothing because they couldn't be verified without revealing who I was. So I did what I had to do. I cleaned houses. I survived. I waited. Waited for what? Marcus asked. Regina looked at Ethan, and something hard glinted in her eyes. For the right moment. For the universe to remind people like Mr. Royce that intelligence isn't measured by wealth, that education isn't owned by the privileged, that the people you dismiss as furniture might be the only ones who can save you when your world starts to crumble. Ethan made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. I'm going to prison. That letter, it says I'm going to prison. The letter says you might go to prison if you don't respond appropriately, Regina corrected. There's a significant difference. But I didn't know. I didn't authorize those transfers. My financial controller, Morrison, he handles all the Eastern European accounts. I trusted him. I signed off on the partnership documents, but I didn't know about any money laundering or sanctions violations. Then you need to prove that, Regina said simply. You need to cooperate with the investigation, provide all your internal communications with Morrison, show the authorities that you were a victim of your employee's criminal activity rather than a conspirator. Ethan stood up abruptly, pacing now, running his hands through his hair. I need lawyers, international lawyers, people who understand Zoravian law and U.S. law and extradition treaties. I need to respond to Dmitri immediately. Show him I'm taking this seriously. He stopped pacing and looked at Regina with desperate eyes. I need you. I'm sorry, what? Regina's voice was ice. I need you to help me. Please. You're the only person I know who speaks Zoravian, who understands their legal system, who can translate everything accurately. I'll pay you anything. Name your price. Just please, help me through this. The staff in the doorway were watching this reversal of power with expressions ranging from satisfaction to disbelief. The man who'd spent years treating them like insects was begging the woman he'd mocked not 20 minutes ago. Regina let the silence stretch out, let Ethan feel every second of his vulnerability. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried the weight of judgment. You just told me I could have your salary if I translated that letter correctly. Yes, of course I'll honor that. $7 million. It's yours. I don't want your money, Mr. Royce. Regina set the letter down on his desk. I want you to understand something. You said that intelligence follows resources, that people like me don't really think. You said it was biology, that it wasn't my fault I was simple. Ethan's face crumpled. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I was angry and frustrated and I took it out on you. I'm sorry. You've been taking it out on all of us for years, Marcus said from the doorway, his voice hard. Every day, you remind us that we're less than you, that we're stupid, that we're lucky you even employ us. I know, Ethan said, and tears were actually starting to form in his eyes. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been horrible to all of you. Sorry isn't enough, the housekeeper said. Sorry is just words. What matters is what you do now. Regina walked to the window, looking out over the manicured grounds, the expensive sculptures, the view that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. When she turned back, her face was thoughtful. I'll help you, Mr. Royce, not because you deserve it, but because I believe in the law. I believe that people should face consequences for actual crimes, not for being ignorant or negligent. If you truly didn't know about Morrison's criminal activities, then you shouldn't go to prison for them. Ethan's relief was visible, his shoulders sagging. Thank you. Thank you so much. But, Regina continued, her voice sharpening, there are conditions. Non-negotiable conditions. Anything. Name them. First, you will give every person on your staff a 50% raise, effective immediately. And you will write each of them a personal apology for how you've treated them. Ethan nodded rapidly. Done. Absolutely. Second, you will fund a scholarship program for refugees and immigrants seeking to have their foreign credentials recognized. $1 million a year, administered by an independent organization. People like me, who left everything behind and couldn't prove who they were, deserve a chance to use their education. Yes, I'll set it up tomorrow. Third, and here Regina's voice went very quiet, very serious. You will never, ever dismiss someone again based on their job or their appearance. You will treat every person you meet with basic human dignity, whether they're a CEO or someone who cleans your toilets, because you've just learned the hardest way possible that you have no idea who anyone really is. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I will. Promise. I've been a monster. I've been so caught up in my own ego that I forgot people are people, not props in my life. Words are easy, Mr. Royce, especially when you're desperate. Regina picked up the letter again. We'll see if you mean them. Now, we need to work quickly. That letter is dated October 15th. Today is October 26th. We have less than 24 hours to draft a response. Gather your internal documents regarding Morrison's activities, and establish your cooperation with the Zoravian authorities. She turned to Ethan's assistant. I'll need access to all of Mr. Royce's business communications for the past 2 years, specifically anything relating to the Zoravia deal. Email archives, text messages, signed documents, everything. The assistant looked at Ethan, who nodded frantically. Give her whatever she needs. Full access. Marcus, Regina continued, slipping into a leadership role as naturally as breathing. Could you please make coffee? This is going to be a very long night. Strong coffee. Lots of it. With pleasure, Marcus said, a smile playing on his lips. Watching you work is going to be the highlight of my year. Over the next 16 hours, the mansion transformed into a war room. Regina sat at Ethan's computer, pulling up files, reading through years of correspondence, building a timeline of Morrison's activities. She drafted responses in both English and Zoravian, each one carefully calibrated to show cooperation without admitting to crimes Ethan hadn't committed. Ethan watched her work with something like awe. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, switching between languages effortlessly. She caught details in the financial records that he'd completely missed, patterns of behavior that suggested Morrison had been running his scheme for over 3 years. Here, Regina said around 3 in the morning, pointing at a spreadsheet on the screen. Look at these transfer dates. Morrison always made the questionable payments within 48 hours of you traveling abroad. He knew you wouldn't be checking accounts closely when you were at conferences or meeting clients. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, following her finger. I never noticed. I trusted him completely. That's what he counted on, Regina said without judgment. He exploited your trust and your tendency to delegate financial oversight. That doesn't make you a criminal, but it does make you negligent. The Zoravian authorities will need to see that you're taking responsibility for that negligence and implementing controls to ensure it never happens again. She pulled up a blank document and began typing. We'll include a section in your response outlining the reforms you're implementing. Quarterly external audits, dual authorization for any international transfers over 50,000 euros, and immediate termination of Morrison with a full investigation into his activities. He's already fired, Ethan said bitterly. As of right now, he's fired. I'll have legal start the investigation first thing in the morning. The staff had stayed through the night, bringing food and coffee, watching this woman they'd worked alongside transform into someone none of them had fully recognized. The housekeeper sat in a corner, tears occasionally sliding down her cheeks as she watched Regina work with such fierce competence. I can't believe we didn't know, she whispered to Marcus. All this time, she was brilliant, and we just thought she was quiet. She needed to be invisible, Marcus replied softly. She was hiding. We were just too blind to see what was right in front of us. By dawn, Regina had completed a comprehensive response package. A detailed letter to Dimitri in perfect formal Zoravian, a timeline of events showing Ethan's lack of knowledge, copies of communications proving Morrison had actively concealed information, and a cooperation agreement offering to provide any additional documentation the authorities required. "This is the best we can do on short notice," Regina said, her voice hoarse from hours of talking and translating. "You need to send this within the next 2 hours to meet Dimitri's deadline. Then you need to hire a lawyer who specializes in international financial crimes. I can recommend 3 firms that have experience with Zoravian law." Ethan stared at the documents on the screen, then at Regina. "You saved my life. If I'd tried to handle this alone, if I'd hired the wrong translator or failed to understand the nuances, I'd be on my way to a Zoravian prison right now." "You would have figured something out eventually," Regina said, though they both knew that wasn't true. "No, I wouldn't have. I would have panicked, made mistakes, said the wrong things." Ethan's voice broke. "And I would have deserved it. Not for Morrison's crimes, but for how I've treated people. For being so arrogant that I couldn't see genius standing right in front of me." He stood up from the desk, his expensive suit rumpled from the all-night session, his face haggard with exhaustion and shame. "I told you yesterday that intelligence follows resources. I told you it was biology. I was spouting social Darwinist garbage because it made me feel superior." "Yes," Regina said simply. "You were. Intelligence doesn't follow resources. It's distributed randomly, democratically, without any regard for bank accounts or family names, or where you were born." Ethan looked around at his staff, all of them watching this moment. Marcus trained under Michelin star chefs. Sarah has a degree in horticulture. Jennifer speaks 5 languages. And I treated all of you like you were nothing because I needed to believe I was more important than I actually am. "You're important to a lot of people," Regina said. "You employ 50 people across your companies. You make investment decisions that affect thousands of lives. What you're not is more valuable as a human being than anyone else. That's what you need to learn." "I'm learning it now." Ethan turned to his assistant. "Send out a memo to all department heads. Full staff meeting next week. I want to hear from everyone about how we can improve working conditions, compensation, and respect in this organization. And I want to personally apologize to every person I've ever belittled." The assistant nodded, making notes on her tablet. "I'll arrange it." Ethan looked back at Regina. "What happens to you now?" "Hurry!" she cried. The guard in front punched the access code. The door clicked. They shoved it open and rolled the gurney inside. The guard behind them entered last and slammed the door shut with a force that made the frame shake. He locked the deadbolt. Then all 3 of them stood still, panting. Grace pressed her back against the door, trying to calm her breathing. "This can't go on," she whispered. "He's hunting us." Dr. Renaud wiped sweat from his forehead. "The police are searching every floor. They'll find him." Grace shook her head. "They won't. He's done this before. He knows how to blend in. He knows how to disappear." One of the guards walked to the trauma wing window and peeked outside. "Emergency lights only. Whole wing is dark." Grace leaned over Edward. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Panic tightened her throat. "Dr. Renaud," his chest. The doctor hurried over. "He's weakening. His adrenaline levels must be crashing after all this stress." Grace whispered, "We need to keep him awake, or at least stable." Dr. Renaud nodded. "I'll prepare a temporary stimulant." Grace held Edward's hand again, rubbing her thumb gently against his skin. "Edward, please. Please don't slip away now. You're so close." A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. Suddenly, a soft knock tapped against the trauma wing door behind her. Grace froze. Everyone turned. 3 taps. Slow. Deliberate. "No," Grace whispered. The guard approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" No reply. The guard looked at Grace. "It's probably staff, someone trapped." Grace shook her head violently. "No. No, don't open it." The guard hesitated, but protocol made him call out again, "Identify yourself." Silence. Then, a quiet voice came through the door. "Let me in, please. Help me." It was a woman's voice, fragile, trembling, sounding like a terrified nurse. Dr. Renault whispered, "That could be one of our nurses." Their sentences ranged from 15 to 30 years. "By the time they get out, I'll be old enough that they probably won't recognize me." Ethan watched her transformation with something like wonder. The quiet, invisible maid had completely vanished, replaced by a woman of such confidence and capability that it was hard to believe they were the same person. "Before you go back to saving the world," he said quietly, "will you let me do something? Not as payment, because I couldn't possibly pay you what I owe you, but as a thank you." "That depends on what it is," Regina said cautiously. "Let me fund your work. Whatever organization you end up with, I want to make a significant donation. Enough to hire more translators, to expand into new regions, to make sure other people with your skills can do what you do safely and well." Ethan's voice was earnest now, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I'm serious about that scholarship program, but this would be separate. This would be about supporting the specific work you believe in." Regina studied him for a long moment. $2 million, she said finally. 1 million to Translators Without Borders and 1 million to the International Association of Conference Interpreters Crisis Response Fund. And you'll donate it anonymously, not as a tax write-off or a PR move, but because it's the right thing to do. "Done," Ethan said immediately. "I'll have my accountant set it up today." The sun was rising now, golden light streaming through the study windows, illuminating the exhausted faces of people who'd witnessed something extraordinary. A reversal, a revelation, a moment when the world had turned upside down and reset itself into a truer configuration. "I should go," Regina said, gathering her things. "You need to send those documents, and I need to sleep for about 16 hours. "Will we see you again?" Marcus asked. "Maybe. Probably not as your coworker, though. I think my days of dusting shelves are behind me." She paused at the door, looking back at the gathered group. "Thank you, all of you, for being kind to me these past months. You made hiding bearable." "We should have seen you," the housekeeper said, wiping her eyes. "Really seen you. Most people don't look past the surface. That's not unique to Mr. Royce, though he was certainly the most aggressive about it." Regina's gaze settled on Ethan one last time. "You asked me yesterday if I ever think about my life, about how I ended up cleaning houses. The answer is yes, constantly. But I also think about privilege and power and the arbitrary nature of fate. You were born into wealth. I was born into a middle-class family in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. You got an MBA from Harvard. I got a master's in linguistics from the University of Zoravia, which means nothing here. You failed upward into millions. I succeeded right into danger and had to start over from zero." She opened the door, and cool morning air swept into the study. "None of that makes either of us better or worse than the other. It just makes us human. What matters is what we do with our circumstances, how we treat people along the way, and whether we're willing to learn when life teaches us hard lessons." "I'm learning," Ethan said softly. "I promise you, I'm learning." "Good. Because the world needs fewer people who think intelligence follows resources and more people who understand that genius can show up anywhere, in anyone, regardless of what they're wearing or what job they're doing or how much money is in their bank account." With that, Regina walked out of the mansion and into the brightening morning. The staff watched her go, this woman who'd been invisible for so long suddenly blazing with visibility. "Well," Marcus said after a moment, "that was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed." "She destroyed him," the assistant said, but there was admiration in her voice. "Completely destroyed his entire worldview in one night." "No," Ethan said quietly, staring at the door where Regina had disappeared. "She saved me. She destroyed my arrogance, yes, but she saved the person underneath. The person I'd buried under money and ego and cruelty." He turned to face his staff, all of them looking at him with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. "I meant what I said. Things are changing, starting now. Raises, apologies, respect, all of it. You have my word. Your word hasn't meant much in the past, Sarah the housekeeper said bluntly. I know. So judge me by my actions instead. Ethan moved to his computer and pulled up the response documents Regina had prepared. First action. Send these documents and save my company from a legal nightmare. Second action. Transfer $2 million to the organizations Regina specified. Third action. Call each of you into my office individually and apologize for specific things I've said and done. Fourth action. Implement every reform we discussed last night. Fifth action. Spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the second chance she just gave me. Marcus smiled slightly. That's a good start. It's not enough, but it's what I can do today. Ethan hit send on the email to Dimitri, and the documents vanished into the digital ether, carrying with them his explanation, his cooperation, his hope for redemption. The staff began to disperse, heading home to rest or starting their daily routines, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something fundamental had changed in the Royce mansion, like a curse had been lifted or a spell broken. 3 months later, Ethan was in his study when an envelope arrived. Heavy cream paper, a wax seal, but this time with a crest he recognized, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Inside was a brief note in elegant handwriting. Mr. Royce, I wanted you to know that your donation helped fund a new translation center in Athens that's processing asylum claims in 23 languages. We're helping people tell their stories, prove their cases, start new lives. Words still have power. Thank you for helping us use them well. Regina. Below her signature was a postscript. P.S. I saw in the news that your employee Morrison was convicted on 14 counts of money laundering and fraud. I'm glad you weren't standing beside him. Sometimes being ignorant is almost as dangerous as being guilty. Keep learning. Ethan read the note 3 times, then carefully placed it in a frame on his desk where he would see it every day. A reminder of the night his world collapsed and rebuilt itself. A reminder that intelligence doesn't follow resources. A reminder that the people you dismiss as furniture might be the only ones who can save you when everything falls apart. 6 months after that, a video appeared online that started going viral. It showed Regina at a refugee camp in Lebanon, translating between a Syrian woman and a UN official, her face intent and compassionate as she gave voice to stories that desperately needed to be heard. The comments section filled with praise, with people calling her a hero, marveling at her skills. One comment stood out, posted from an account with no profile picture and just initials, ER. This woman saved my life, it read. Not because she translated a letter, though she did that perfectly, but because she showed me that intelligence and worth aren't measured by bank accounts. They're measured by what you do for others, how you treat people, and whether you're willing to see genius in unexpected places. Thank you, Regina, for everything. The story spread as stories do. Not the details of Ethan's near disaster, which remained confidential, but the broader narrative. A millionaire who dismissed his maid, only to discover she was a brilliant linguist who'd saved him from legal catastrophe. Think pieces were written about class and education, about how we value different kinds of work, about the invisible expertise that surrounds us if we'd only open our eyes. Ethan did interviews, carefully, humbly, always redirecting attention to the lesson rather than his own redemption arc. I'm not the hero of the story, he told one reporter. I'm the cautionary tale. The hero was always there, dusting my books and fixing my clocks, and I never saw her because I'd convinced myself that people who clean houses couldn't possibly be brilliant. I was wrong, and that wrongness almost destroyed me. The reforms he'd promised actually happened. His company became known for how well it treated employees, for competitive wages and respectful management. The scholarship program he'd established helped 30 refugees get their foreign credentials recognized in its first year. And Ethan himself became someone different, someone who asked questions and listened to answers, who treated the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. But on hard days, when old habits threatened to resurface, he would look at that framed note on his desk and remember, "Translate this correctly and you can have my salary." He'd sneered at a woman he'd dismissed as simple. She'd translated it perfectly. And in doing so, she translated him too, from arrogance into humility, from blindness into sight, From a millionaire who had everything into a man who finally understood what truly mattered. Words have power. Real power. The power to reveal truth, to save lives, to transform the people who hear them if those people are willing to listen. Ethan had listened, and that made all the difference. If the story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people around you and the assumptions we all make about intelligence and worth, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone you'd underestimated was actually extraordinary? Have you been the person who was underestimated? Share your stories,